I'm waiting for the signal. Is that a middle finger? No, okay. Okay, good. Middle finger is also good, so as long as there's some sort of signal. But first of all, thank you everyone for joining us, and welcome to Stone and Chalk, where it's the home of the Aus DeFi Association here in Sydney. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and on which we stand and gather, and I pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, and future. So the agenda for today, so if you didn't know you're at the Aus DeFi Association meetup, congratulations, you're in the right space. Regardless of where you come from, blockchain is for everyone. And so we're going to go through a few things, a quick little bit of updates from us and what's been happening over the past month since the last meetup. And then we're going to get into some presentations from various people. So if we can just go to the next slide, because the clicker doesn't work from here. So this is a QR code. You would have seen these. The QR code goes to our link tree. There's a few things on there, such as the website, the Discord, the Twitter, the YouTube, the Substack, the whatever else it is that we're doing. And if you want to help out with any of that, I would love that. I feel like there's just so many things that we're doing and trying to help out with, and we've had some people now come on board and help out with the podcast, right? So now it's something that I don't have to do, but then there's other people that are wanting to help out with the writing, other people that want to help out with helping run these meetups. This is a space where you can really make a name for yourself in the Web3 community by helping out, by giving more than receiving. You will receive in future. So let's go to the next slide. We'll go back to that. So highlights, more Twitter followers, which is great. It was a bit of a bear market on Twitter followers. I think everyone left for some reason, bank crash or whatever, but yeah, it was a bit slower, but it's starting to pick up again. The Web3 Innovation Center, so if you guys don't know, we are here in Stone and Chalk because Stone and Chalk, which does fintech, health tech, reg tech, and a whole lot of other tech, prop tech even, they wanted to focus on Web3 as well, and they want to bring a community together. And one of those things means that let's have desks where after a meetup like this, people working together can go sit together. Here in Sydney, they've got 2 spaces, Tech Central as well as here. Adelaide has a space, and I was just in Melbourne, and you'll see some photos from that. Token mapping, thank you to everyone who contributed to the token mapping consultation. It was, we submitted it on midnight, just in time after asking for 2-week extension. So that was great, and that was after a meetup in Melbourne. So we're very lucky I was able to get that through, but everyone that submitted, what we basically did, and you can read it on our website, it's on the blog, we collated what people's answers were to try to find what the commonalities were. And there were a lot of commonalities, but there were some differences. And because we're so open, we just shared it all, right? So we summarized it, and then we also shared at the back end, like you can read everyone's individual response. So that's there. We'll talk about the RBA CBDC project. NotCentralised, the group that I'm with, is part of that pilot testing project, looking at how in a wholesale sense, we can use CBDCs as part of the construction industry. There's other use cases there. You might have heard of CBA, ANZ, MasterCard, some small companies, but you know, they're trying to do some stuff in the space. And then real world crypto with Crypto Lulu. There's a restaurant down in Circular Quay with views of the Opera House and Harbour Bridge. And they're using NFTs as token-gated memberships with perks such as exclusive events with, you might see a government minister there or two, you might see an industry leader there or two. So really cool stuff. Let's go to the next slide and we'll whiz through these. So the agenda today, updates from me. There's going to be a bit of a discussion on CBDCs, and we want this as a discussion starter. This is not the be-all and end-all on CBDCs. It's a very topical subject, and so we just want to put some stuff out there to be discussed, and you'll see where we can continue the discussion. We'll probably pick this up again at future meetups as well. We'll go through refi stuff with Niko. Where's Niko? Put your hand up. There he is. Good sir from Hedera. You guys might have heard of Hedera. And if not, then you really should. We'll go through some stuff with Ash. Where is Ash? There he is. Ash, they are right at the back, and we're going to go through some building in the bear market and, you know, from the experiences traveling around and stuff as well. I think, Ash, you've just come back from South Africa, so we'll go through that. Some really interesting stories there. And finally, Deb Tyson from Blisspot. There we are. So we'll go through that NFT and wellness project. So let's get into the updates really quickly, because I'm starting to lose it from my own voice. So Fireblocks, welcome to a new sponsor. So Fireblocks, if you guys don't know, yes. And thank you to all the sponsors out there. We've got Adiuva Legal. Where are you, Jabs? I've seen you here. There he is. One of our sponsors there. Block Earner, James, where are you? Put your hand up. Block Earner is here as well. James had to duck out. That's okay, but we thank him for the pizzas. And we've got some other sponsors like Sand, Stone and Chalk are a sponsor. Fireblocks have onboarded now as well. So it's really great. We would not be able to do all of this stuff without the great sponsors out there. And if you're interested and, you know, what do you get as a sponsor apart from me talking about you, we can talk about that. So Melbourne had a DeFi event. I'm sorry, my face is in there a lot. I take selfies, you know, so I can crop myself out later, but you got Steve Vallis there, Shane from Fireblocks, Rochelle, Steve and Rochelle. We were at Blockchain Australia. Now they're Blockchain APAC, a new group, and doing a lot of stuff. They were in New Zealand recently. You got the Sansan folks, Amina from Clayton Utes. She presented. We've got something on the blog about the Hermes NFT court case. So if you want to read up about that from a lawyer, that's really great. And then some of the presentation. It's a bit dim there, but it's probably because of the lights. Let's go to the next one. Chainalysis also did an event. We had Mike Meisels and the Chainalysis crew basically talking about some new features of their product. It was a bit of a discovery day. So if you brought your laptop, you could play a treasure hunt. And they've got some really cool tools for that. So check that out. The next one, Newcastle. So we're in 7 cities now. And one of them is Newcastle, the biggest regional city in Australia. And we're very lucky to have the photos up here from the Hashlock crew. Thank you, Hashlock. Yes. So they took these awesome photos. So Newcastle, just like every city started off small. It started off with 10 to 15 to 20 people and then grew from there. And we're hoping that Newcastle can really be a base for what is going on in the blockchain space over there. So really great to see the discussions there. Let's go to the next one. Token mapping. So as I said, what we did for each of the questions from all the responses that we got, lengthy and some shorter, but you know, a lot to read. We basically tried to find some of the common themes. So for example, for question 1, what do you think the government should be doing in terms of regulation in crypto? Most people agreed with balancing regulation with innovation, providing clarity and guidelines, reducing compliance costs, and internal harmonization, whatever the heck that means, but I wrote it. So it was really good to get all the responses, but it's all on the blog. We keep it all open like that. We did something like this last year for the Casper's papers, where everyone that contributed gets acknowledged and we share their responses. And then you can read more of that. So yep, take a look at that. And the podcast. So we've got the great, we've got the Hashlock guys here. Shahira is up in Brisbane and she's our main podcast host. Lee's going to do some podcasts with us too, which is great. And if anyone is interested in contributing or being a guest, please do. This community is for you. The reason why we're doing all this is for all of you people at home, because this is being live streamed and recorded, so you will be able to watch this later on. You can say, Mum, I was on TV. Yeah, so the podcast as well, so check that out on our YouTube channel, Aus DeFi Association on YouTube. The Web3 Innovation Centre, so on the right, you've got the Sydney desk space, so just upstairs on level 5. On the left, you've got Samira from Elbait, Samira Tolo, and then you've got Ben from Collective Shift. You might have been using that research product, and Samira's got a great exchange kind of tool there. And yeah, there's a few more people out of Melbourne. We're starting to grow the Adelaide space as well. So people that want to work together, Stone and Chalk is providing that experience. So if you want to talk about that, come and chat afterward. Let's go to the next one. Okay, that's it. I'm out of breath. Where's Arturo and where's Nick? Come on down to the morbid discussion of CBDCs. I'm just joking. Hang on a second. So you've, I think there's one microphone here.
2, 2, 1, 2. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here to, sorry. So CBDCs, we thought it would be worth not having an exceptionally passionate debate, because we'll save that for our Discord channel. By the way, if any of you would like some hardcore entertainment, please have a look at some of the super high quality discussion we've had on the Discord in the last few, kind of the last week. I think it's been seriously exactly what this kind of forum should be, which is, passionate people talking about things that matter to them dearly and exchanging points of view that might be diametrically opposed, but everyone is entitled to them. And that is, 100% what we're about. We are not about censorship. We're not about enforcing any particular view over another view. Life is about grayscale. It's not about digital black and white. So they were genuinely, really, really interesting and productive discussions. Anyway, so we thought we would just briefly talk about CBDCs, really just in the Australian context, given that, as you can see here, we've all become CBDC maxis now because we're in the RBA pilot program.
Tyrannical
CBDC maxi, I think, is your new tagline. And because we are available for sale, all the RBA had to do was pass us a brown paper bag with some not digital currency in it, like some actual physical currency in it, and we joined the pilot program and are now their mouthpiece. So if we flick onto the old next slide, Mr. Mark Montfort, please. Thank you. Couple of things that we wanted to point out. Firstly, you've got a whole bunch of different iterations of CBDCs around the globe that are in different phases of ideation, of being squashed entirely, being tried in pilot programs, and definitely one size does not fit all. It is quite a nuanced spectrum of CBDCs. At one extreme, you've got the arguably what is the most kind of terrifying to some version, which is a retail CBDC. What do we mean by that? We mean that I go into a shop, I bring out my phone, I go to the point of sale, I say, yes, I would like that giant pack of jumbo, soft to the touch, Durex, please. And then because that's what we tend to use in the office, and then I will tap my phone on the point of sale, but I'm doing that with CBDC that sits in my wallet. That is the slightly more overtly controllable version. And I think when people hear CBDC, the hysteria jumps to that view of where suddenly everyone knows that I didn't really buy the jumbo. I bought the pequeño sized ones because the central bank saw that on my receipt, and suddenly now I'm lampooned in front of all my male friends who know that I have a tiny wiener. But what is the less terrifying version then, which we are much more interested in, which is wholesale? How would you describe that?
I think that even in the retail example, there's so many different iterations, because what Nick described there was potentially a functional aspect of how you could effectively design those smart contracts, but there is obviously the legal aspect of what the RBA could and should be able to do with this, with this flow of capital. Right, I think that talking about CBDCs in general is almost like talking about stablecoins, and we all know that UST and USDC and USDT are extremely different beasts, and they're not cash, as you all saw with the depegging, right? CBDC would not depeg by definition. But if we then go back to the conversation with regards to what a wholesale CBDC would be, in concept. Because I think that it needs to be extremely clear that CBDCs are a concept right now. They're not even a token. It would be a token that can only be held by either by institutional counterparts or by banks. And if they're held only by banks, it's effectively just a tokenized version. And when I say tokenized, it's almost a blockchain version of what reserve bank currency already is, which that is a digitized version of the dollar already. It's just that it's held in an Excel sheet, at the RBA instead of being on a blockchain. So there's so many different nuances. Now, I would say that the big difference, and it sounds pretty obvious, but the big difference between a wholesale CBDC in general terms and a retail CBDC in general terms is that a retail CBDC is a relationship directly between the end customer and the RBA, very much like cash. Obviously, the RBA is very hesitant towards something like that for multiple reasons, and these are all speculations, but one of those reasons is that if the data exists on an RBA ledger, they could be liable for not doing things with that data if that data implicates or indicates illicit activities. So the legal repercussions of sitting on that data are things that I don't think the RBA effectively wants to have as a risk. they could care less about what you do with your money. I mean, it's when you're within a big organization, you have a very specific remit. What you care about if you're at the RBA is economic stability, and economic stability is not going to be affected by the type of condom that you buy, right? Simple as that. The ones that might care about that would be the police, AFP, and honestly, they already have all the data they want from you. So I think that for the people that actually do care about privacy, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, I think that you should, but if you really, really, really care, doing something about it is not stopping a CBDC. It's actually figuring out what your data is currently doing and having a proper conversation about that. I think that the conversation of, I care about my privacy, therefore I'm going to stop a CBDC is extremely lazy. And it needs to be expanded like a lot, because otherwise you're just whinging.
Yeah, you'd start somewhere else. I mean, you'd have words with Facebook, you'd have words with a lot of the legacy Web2 businesses that already build their business model off your data. So you would arguably start there. So if we look globally then, what's been happening? I mean, possibly one of the safest jurisdictions in the world for digital assets is at the top of this list in terms of rolling out, and that is the Bahamas. Now, I think all of you in this room, I'm joking, by the way, all the people go, what? No, that was a joke. It was a reference to FTX. Sorry, if anyone's still hurting. Anyway, whatever. Bahamas, too soon? Is that too soon? Come on, it's Web3. We've got to be able to laugh at these things. Pilot programs, yep, Canada, China, blah, blah, blah. Interestingly, in the Eurozone, you've got this kind of multiple track approach to CBDCs, where each of the national central banks has been given their own free rein to trial different versions of a digital euro in their domestic economies, but they're kind of hermetically sealed in their monetary systems. Very difficult to do if you think about it. We've got a common currency between, it's a little bit like if in the US they said we're going to trial a digital dollar, but by the way, California, you're going to do a different program to Washington State, who's going to do a different program to Florida, and you're not going to allow those dollars to mingle. Interesting challenges.
And sorry, by the way, try a digital dollar. It's really retry 98% of all of the dollars in circulation.
Yes,
but within a blockchain, not a digital version of it, right?
Thank you, tyrannical overlord. That's a very important distinction. And the UK example is really interesting. A friend of ours, Kate Dawson, who is at KPMG in the UK, she essentially runs KPMG's unit on cryptocurrency regulation, blockchain regulation, really useful person to reach out to on LinkedIn. She encouraged us to have a read of a paper by John Cunliffe of the Bank of England, which talks about the digital pound, and they're looking at a trial where retail would be allowed to have up to £20,000 in your personal wallet possession of digital sterling, but it will never earn any interest. So how do you distinguish between private sector stable coins that have a degree of risk to them, where you can earn interest on them because you can deposit them? Digital sterling from the Bank of England, never any interest on it, and a maximum amount in any single wallet, and used for transactional purposes for atomic settlement. Quite an interesting conceptual sort of discussion.
And those small details have massive implications, because what does it mean that you can't earn interest on them?
Yeah.
Right? Does it mean that you're not allowed to stake them? You're not allowed to transfer them to somebody else in return for an interest to be paid for it to you? Like it's pretty big things, right?
Yeah, no, it is. It's very interesting. Anyway, so that was one thing we want to talk about, is just, when people start talking about CBDCs, what exactly are you talking about here? Advantages, we've just been discussing this. Secure and reliable, yes, definitely. Payment remittance, of course. It's still a promise, right? But it's a promise from a central bank. And a central bank, by definition, controls the money supply. So it is a more stable coin than, say, a USDC. As much as we like USDC, at the end of the day, that is a 24/7 fractionizable money market fund, is USDC. So is USDT, just with shitty auditing, or sorry, non-existent auditing, beg your pardon. We've got to acknowledge that is, certainly more stability from that stablecoin. If they're genuinely programmable, Katerina, did you think you could genuinely walk into an Aus DeFi event straight from the whale section without getting shit hung on you, because think again, my friend. This is Katerina, who's possibly the most famous whale section occupant of all crypto conferences. So thanks for coming, Katerina. We are truly blessed. Cons then absolutely can be costly and complex, right? I mean, Arturo, what do you see as some of these potential negatives, particularly that for the banking sector? I think is a good point.
I think that the biggest risk that we have with is it retail?
Just generally, you just freestyle, my friend.
So worst case scenario, retail CBDC. Now, picture this. If I could hold cash, actual cash, in my account, or sorry, in my hand, I'd probably do that instead of putting that into a bank. Because when I put it into a bank, I'm actually carrying balance sheet risk from that bank. It's a credit instrument that I have with them. On the other hand, if I do trust my own ability of keeping a private key, or if there's some sort of a self-custody mechanism that is safe, I'd probably keep my current account in CBDC in my own wallet, not give it to somebody else, and therefore carry credit risk on the back of that. So what does that mean? Bank run, possibly. Right? Because why would you hold your cash with somebody else? Now, is that a bad thing for banks? Well, obviously, but is it a bad thing for society? Hell yes, because we don't really know as a civilization how to deal with massive financial infrastructures where banks don't play the role that they currently play. Right? So if we think that we're going to create a CBDC that is a retail CBDC that enables me to de-risk myself by effectively carrying that in my own wallet, then it's a big risk to just say we're changing everything and then we'll figure things out as we go. We haven't been able to figure things out properly within a system that we've been working on, for a few thousand years. What makes us think that we can on the fly figure things out like real time and not fuck it up? I mean, I don't have enough trust in people, to be honest, for that. So, yeah, I think that the biggest risk that we carry having a retail CBDC, even if I think that that's the right way to go from a financial engineering point of view, is that we don't know how to deal with it. And let me just expand on the financial engineering part. If I have a CBDC and then have a stablecoin, and then I have myself as an end retail user, and I'm not allowed to hold a CBDC. I need to go through a stablecoin. The easiest, most riskless way for me to hold that is for me to, or for a bank to create just a standard wrapping contract that sits between me and that CBDC. It's just like wrapped BTC, for example. But there's nothing that I'm achieving with that apart from adding systemic risk to the infrastructure because I have an extra contract. And that extra contract carries risk by definition because it's an extra thing, right? You can audit it and you can have amazing auditors doing that. We're looking right here. But I think that
big shout to Hashlock. For anyone who missed that, big shout to Hashlock.
But I think that auditors better than anybody else could just agree that every time you have an extra piece of code that sits within your system, that is an extra level of risk. And you can only know if the risk is real if it sits there for a long period of time and there's a lot of money on that contract because everybody's going to try to steal from that contract. And if they can't after a few billion passed and so forth, then you should be okay. But you should be okay. It's not that you're entirely certain that it's fine. So then again, why add risk unnecessarily?
No, I think that's fair. Next slide, please, Mr. Slide Controller, which brings us neatly to a consideration of, well, then, what the fuck is a bank doing anyway? If we're questioning now some of the foundations of the way that economies and growth is financed, what kind of is a bank? And we had a really good discussion with a very close friend of the Aus DeFi Association who we had lunch with, who's not sitting that far away from us. And we talked about this conceptual idea of, well, then what actually is a bank doing? And then where is the money coming from that the bank is giving to you? And what really changes without the banks there? So I thought it was worth just a really stylized primer, hyper stylized, full disclosure, primer on what does the cap stack look like for a bank. And I thought we'd pick some Aussie examples. So if you think about what a bank is doing, it's taking in deposits. It doesn't have to keep all those deposits as reserves. So what it can do is this thing called fractional reserve banking. What that means is if I take in some reserves, I can then lend out multiples of those reserves to the economy. I am literally creating credit. That's what a bank does. So it's not the Reserve Bank of Australia who picks up a big truck of cash, takes it along to NAB, deposits that truck of cash with NAB, and then effectively asks NAB to distribute that same pot of cash out into the economy. That is not how it works. That's hyper inefficient. What happens is, just picking NAB as an example, you go and deposit $100 in a NAB deposit account. NAB can maybe lend out 10 times that amount to create assets, and it does that by changing ledgers. It doesn't get that money from the central bank. It is allowed to create that credit because it has a banking license and because it behaves itself in its regulatory restraints and so on. So that's what credit creation is. That's what fractional reserve banking is literally creating numbers out of thin air because they're allowed to. So what does that mean for a balance sheet of a bank? What does it look like? Well, all of the four majors, throw a blanket over them, you wouldn't really know which one you're looking at. They've all got about $1 trillion worth of assets. That's great, but that is not actually what regulators care about. Regulators care about their risk-weighted assets. What is a risk-weighted asset? Well, if I lend Arturo some money, pretty fucking risky, quite frankly. If Arturo lends me some money, because I'm more responsible, not very risky at all. So the bank has to put aside less capital for me as the white guy than the cocaine dealing Venezuelan over there who you can't, oh, what, too soon? No, what, come on. Work with us here. This is Web3, man. So anyway, the point being that there's very, very risky assets, right, that are so terrifyingly risky you could lose all your money. And so the regulator says you have to put aside 100% of the risk weight, effectively of the 100% of your capital, your required risk capital, you have to put against 100% of the value of that asset. Bit confusing. What that means is if I have $100 in a very risky asset and my required capital level is 10%, I have to put aside 10% of $100. It doesn't mean I have to one-for-one back them. That's like literally no leverage at all. A zero risk-weighted asset, I don't have to put aside any capital because that is deemed as being risk-free. One of the problems with SVB and the other banks is they were owning zero risk-weighted assets. They were deemed to have no credit risk. They had a fuck ton of duration risk though, and that's what undid them because when yields rose, the values of those assets dropped.
I think,
go.
Yeah, I think that's it's an interesting kind of point to pick up on because one of the big differences, and a lot of people compare what happened in 2008 with what's happening now. Massive difference. 2008, the banks were holding assets that turned to shit. They didn't exist. They stopped existing. They were worthless. Now, the difference is the mark-to-market of the assets that they were holding. So what that means is that I'm currently holding a bond that is guaranteed by the government. That bond was worth 100. It goes down to being worth 80, but if I wait, that bond will go back to 100 in a given period of time, unless the government defaults, obviously. That is very different from an asset being worth 100 and then going down to 50 or going down to 0 without it actually going back up to whatever it was going to be worth. Massive, massive differences. So, I think that's really important to take into account because a lot of people will very incorrectly compare the two scenarios.
Yeah, it is quite different. So the long and the short of this being, yes, there's a lot of numbers on there, but the point being, here's the layer of effectively first loss capital that the regulator is looking at when they're thinking about how risky a bank is. They're looking at this CET1, Common Equity Tier 1 ratio. That is simply common equity plus accumulated profits, basically retained earnings. That's your Common Equity Tier 1. Add on top of that, that's your common equity, plus any A tier 1 securities, additional tier 1 securities, or contingent converts, as they're called, COCOs. That gets you your common equity tier 1. This is the stuff that in principle gets vaporized when things go wrong. So you can see why I said 10 to 1 leverage is, that's about right. They're very roughly 10 to 1 levered. So I've got this bit of genuine capital, and then the rest, all of those assets, 5 and a bit trillion in the Australian banking system, all those assets were created off that common equity tier 1 amount.
So another important point here is that many people say, and rightly so, especially during periods of time like this, I'll come up to that question, fractional banking is bullshit, right? Because there's a boom and a bust, it never works, it breaks here and there and so forth. I think that within its own bubble, that argument is difficult to argue against. But what's the opposite? Or what happens in an economy without fractional banking? I think that many of the jobs that people lost during the bust of a fractional banking system would probably have never been created. Now, what does leverage effectively do? And it's numbers. It's really complex to actually engage and empathize with those numbers. But imagine that you're colonizing, I don't know, an island, and you have a limited amount of food, and you're 10 people, and one of these people says, well, look, I don't have any specific food reserves, but I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna go see what's at the other side of the island. I need to borrow 10% of the food that we have as a group. Now, we don't know what's at the other side of the island. If we choose to allocate this 10%, take that as risk, give that as leverage to this person that is going to go to the other side and find food, and it works out, then there's more food on the other side of the island. That bet actually worked, and we've grown the economy. We've grown our entire food supply. If it doesn't, then we've lost part of that. And it's painful because now we have 10% less food. So the two options are basically, do we just stay here and take no risk, i.e. no leverage, i.e. an environment where fractional banking does not exist, and an environment effectively where you're not printing money to manage the risk that you're taking there? Or do we go for it, right? I'm not saying that there's a right answer, but there are massive consequences to the choice of not having a fractional reserve banking system and an economy or society where we do not print money.
Question, sir.
Yep, let's go. Who had the question? Right here. Yes, sir.
Lots of questions. Excellent.
So my understanding is a lot of these measures of risk are done on the basis of historical fluctuations in the market. So, for instance, a common one is that they calculate potential future risk based on what happened in the past plus or minus one standard deviation. However, once it goes past that estimated standard deviation, all hell breaks loose. How is this any different?
I'll take that.
Sure.
Risk is one of those. It's one of those concepts that you'll always carry, but you'll never touch. Because the second you touch it, it's realized, and it's not risk anymore. Therefore, it's one of the most abstract concepts that we will ever, engage with. If we don't calculate risks based on past, then we don't have a framework to think about what could happen in the future, because we don't have a crystal ball. So we're always going to have some sort of an expectation based on what has happened, because if it hasn't happened before, then probably we think that it's unlikely that it'll happen again, unless there are structural reasons as to why that could happen. Now, the problem is that if it hasn't happened before, but there is a structural reason as to why it could happen, we have to assign a probability towards that event happening. That probability will have a material impact on the cost of that risk. Now, the fact is that when things are going well, we get frustrated with the fact that we can't put on more leverage because, hell, everybody's making money. And we only get really pissed off when the shit hits the fan. Now, the biggest risk that financial systems carry is the risk of correlation, i.e., the risk of things happening all in tandem. In one direction, we only care about the risk happening when things go down, but it is impossible to calculate that properly. So I think that there are very, very smart people dealing with trying to quantify these risks. They're almost always wrong. By how much? I don't know. There is also an element of politics that is part of how you actually choose to assess that risk. A lot of those politics within democratic countries is driven by what people want, because people, governments always chase votes. So there are many, many things that we need to take into account. And effectively thinking that, oh, fuck, you should have known better is, it's a tall call to ask for, right?
We didn't want to get into back and forth audience questions right now, but let's just do it a little bit because we've got to pay respect to the other speakers. This is not a CBDC discussion only. Okay, so just caveating that. But let's give you another just response to that, and then we'll go to you, Angela, and then after that, let's get quickly through the slides and get to the other speakers, please. Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
So it's more of, I'd like to posit the fact that risk calculations now are being done on the basis of an economy that has been booming since the end of the Great Depression in the 30s. That's been in a growing economy, a growing world population, a whole bunch of things pushing things higher. That has ended. That has ended already, and we just haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, there's a few things I'd take issue there. The world population will top out at about 12 billion in 2050 from 8 billion. No, it's 12. Last UNESCO forecasted 12 billion by 2050. Growth will happen. Growth doesn't happen without credit. I think the point that we're making here is, for someone to say we want to end fractional reserve banking is like saying, I would like the drivers of growth to be a tenth as big, please. Because that's what credit creation does. So it's sort of, be careful what you wish for, because then without credit growth, actually statistically, there isn't economic growth. But sorry, carry on.
That's okay. I was reading quite a long article by the professor who is credited with being the originator of quantitative easing. Yeah, he wrote a good article about what he thinks, how reserve banks have really effed things up with quantitative easing this time round versus how he thought it should be applied. And obviously, there's nothing wrong with credit. Obviously, economic growth has depended on credit. But I think the flaw in the argument you're positing today, which I thought I'm borrowing from him, is really that most of this lending has gone not into economic growth. It's gone into home lending, led to over-inflated home prices, massive levels of indebtedness. I was in TradFi. We already had some of the world's highest levels of indebtedness. We got more levels of indebtedness because the Reserve Bank got banks to print more money, on our behalf, but they basically didn't. They lent it all out on non-productive assets. We have a major productivity crisis in Australia, which is part of the reason we have massive inflationary pressures. You don't have to depeg. You can't depeg a fiat because that's sort of logically impossible.
I mean,
but it is effectively
FX is the only way you do that.
Well, effectively, it's been depegged. It's down 10%. That's a lot of trillions of dollars of value. Wiped off the Aussie. So it's sort of not the problem of the fact that, and the reserve banks effectively, you see here and in the US, they've kind of privatized out running money for the economy to businesses that are for profit. But we effectively bankroll them when anything goes wrong, and we will bankroll them if something goes wrong. So I'm not saying there's a better system, but it's not actually working that well at the moment, and because we don't control what those private banks invest in. And we are going to pay the price, and we are effectively depegging our economies because we're not investing in productive assets. Anyway, that's a statement. But
No.
Very valid. It's a very valid statement.
No, and to be clear as well, in none of this discussion and what we're talking about, are we saying that the allocation of credit mechanism because I totally agree with you on housing, completely unproductive. That is the role of capital markets, to deploy capital. Now, you get feverish demand for borrowing from investors who want a second and a third home. That's what drives lending to houses,
Yeah,
right?
we should censor that.
So, but yeah, I think you're right. The capital allocation mechanism and the choices of where credit goes is an amazingly nuanced discussion and a really important one. I think our broader point is, without credit creation and fractional reserve banking, you don't have any extra capital to choose where to allocate, because it's just one for one back. So anyway, let's quickly rattle through. Fine, there's a bit of stuff going on with CBDCs, yay. Next slide. The CFI versus DeFi, I think we could all go over that. No worries there. We've just been talking about that. Blockchain can arguably help in a lot of these areas in terms of transparency, and in terms of the ability of policymakers to monitor the economy in real time. I think that's the point we're making here. Maybe is it worth a quick coverage on the ZK proofs angle around privacy concerns?
I don't think we have time for that.
No,
I think
fair.
that the only point that I'd like to be making personally is that CBDCs don't exist yet. Therefore, we all have an ability to influence what that means. And that influence is not, we're not influencing by saying that we don't want to engage with it.
Yeah, lack of engagement is not influence. It's kind of the opposite. Please join the chat though on the Discord. Lots and lots of really, really good opinions on there. Everyone has a right to an opinion. None of them are right and wrong, apart from Arturo's, which are all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guys, for only going over time by more than 70%. That's fine.
It's valuable.
Let's get Niko up on stage. Niko, you got a mic? Great. Back to switching out slides. Thank you. And that one is off. Look, guys, there's so much that we can get into in that discussion, and we probably will dedicate like a whole session on this like later on. There's a lot of back and forth. Please continue the discussions after this. Please do feel free to grab some drinks and stuff as well. But we're going to talk right now about Hedera and Regenerative Finance. Niko, do you want to give a bit of background just quickly on yourself? No, it's not. At the bottom. Arturo tends to turn things off when he leaves them.
Good start.
There we go.
Hello, everyone. Thanks again for the invite. I've been coming to the events for a long time now, and it's great to be up here. I'm supposed to be going on after that, really intellectual discussion. So hopefully, I'm not too much of a letdown.
We'll make it more fun.
Yeah, exactly. So,
thanks for coming to the events as well. Niko always gives us a score out of 10. We've never hit 8 yet. No, just joking.
Never heard of that before.
No, I'm just joking. I just make it up. I'm just harsh on myself. Let's go to the next slide. So we've got a few questions up here. This is not necessarily for you guys. This is more for me to remember because there's so much going on. So Mark, yes. Niko, can you tell us a bit about what is refi for those folks that haven't heard of it before?
Sure. So I'll just give a bit of an intro about myself. Sorry, that was what you were asking before. Sorry, I kind of missed that. So I'm Niko. I'm from Hedera, and Hedera is a layer 1 that's basically an enterprise-friendly layer 1. Out of all the chains, we are the lowest emitting carbon chain, which is important today, but it'll be even more important over the next coming decades. So we're really well placed to deal with those high volume enterprise use cases. So going to refi, I've got a younger cousin. She's about 15 years old, and I always like to ask her questions in the Web3 space because she's not in Web3, and a lot of my friends are in Web3. So it's like I like to get a different lens, a different opinion. And I asked her, do you know what refi is? And she said, refinancing. And I was like, no, yeah, I suppose it is to some extent, and that's a hot topic at the moment as well. But in this situation, refinancing is basically the combination of two words. And it's regenerative and finance. So regenerative, to explain that, let's look at the opposite of that, and that's extractive. So if we tend to look at business practices over the last, say, 100 years, pretty much all of them are bad for the planet. All of them burn fossil fuels. All of them take natural resources out of the planet, i.e. extracting. And on the next side of things, you've got sustainable. And sustainable isn't good and it's not bad either. It just maintains the level of natural resources on the planet. And then you've got regenerative, which actually works to increase the amount of natural resources in the planet and get financed to do that at the same time. I'll be talking a bit about carbon credits as the vehicle to get financed, just to keep it simple for now. So that's the definition. And I also wanted to speak about what's being done at the moment. So lots of charities and sort of philanthropic cases are doing a lot of this stuff, already. You might have done a plant a tree at work day and things like that. That's great, but it's not going to move the needle on a lot of the targets that we have for 2050 and beyond. Trillions and trillions of dollars is going to have to go back into the planet to really rebuild all the damage we've done on the extractive kind of stuff that we've been doing over the last 100 years. So it's not going to move the needle, and there's a lot we have to do to kind of make that better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And look, if you want to learn more, either you can go to ChatGPT and ask it what is refi, or you can obviously go to Hedera, and they've got some great pages and stuff with the details on there. But with a lot of the work, we do work in the space. We've started to look into the ESG space, and we've got one of our sponsors is Sensend, who are down in Victoria and doing a lot of stuff in the carbon credits space on chain. And you would have heard of Beta Carbon and Toucan and some really big names, KlimaDAO, some of those names come to mind. But whenever we're doing anything DeFi or anything decentralized, people always say, well, why don't I just, the common response is like, I can just do it on a database. Why can't you just do that on the database? And it's not very nuanced, but next question is like why centralization doesn't work here. But yeah, could you expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. So, why the hell am I here? Who's this hippie talking about sustainability? So talking about centralization and how DLT comes into play, broadly, you've got two ends of the transaction. You've got a maker of a carbon credit, and then you've got a buyer of a carbon credit. And all along the middle is a chain of intermediaries. All of them are there to take a cut and to make a profit. And the whole point of DeFi and decentralization is to take away those intermediaries. DeFi, we've seen it with taking away those sorts of products and making them more efficient. Peer-to-peer transactions, and what we're doing now with that is in carbon credits and natural assets. So at the moment, there's lots of intermediaries who are not always great actors, and it's just way more efficient to sell those assets in a decentralized peer-to-peer way. And I think also adding to that, I think the whole point of saving the planet and creating carbon credits is the natural landscape is just extremely, extremely delicate. We've got millions of species of animals and plants, and we've got a very delicate ecosystem that's all held in balance. Now, we're going to have not only extractive products, but extractive projects, but we're going to have a very, very long tail of very hyper-specialized, hyper-unique projects that basically complement the diverse nature of the biodiversity landscape. It's an ecosystem that's delicate, and we can't just have a few big players like we do in big tech, kind of ruling the roost. We need to have a very, very long tail, and that long tail can only really be achieved by decentralization.
And I think, you're talking about like the lowering of barriers and stuff there of people, it's easier to get involved when it's a DeFi play rather than centralized. But on the transparency side of things as well, I guess that's a big part of why something like this is better than a centralized system, because you got the transparency, because quality of these carbon credit kind of projects is a big thing as well. So, anything on that?
Absolutely. And there's two major issues at the moment with the way it works. So you've got bad behavior, and then you've got bad systems as well. And the bad behavior can be just a product of some of the jurisdictions. Corruption's a way of life in a lot of places in the world. It doesn't necessarily mean you're an evil person. That's just the way it's done in certain places. But it's not great for these projects. Some of the behaviors that you can get away with at the moment, double counting carbon credits. So the same carbon credit is basically used twice over or more by different people. You've got leakage, which basically shows one area looking good, but with the expense of another. And then you've got things like not doing something. So if I owned a forest, for example, I could just say, I'm not going to cut it down, so therefore give me a carbon credit. You're not actually doing anything, you're just not doing something. And it's not a very good behavior. And that kind of comes back to the transparency piece, because for trillions of dollars to go back into the planet, we're going to have to really make the whole thing more robust and more transparent, so that auditors can go in, so that the KPMGs and Deloitte can go in and do reports, and so the reports are actually listened to. Because at the moment, everyone knows how much of a Wild West it is, and the reports don't mean that much. So I think a lot of work needs to go in there, and it's the boring stuff like making it auditable and reliable and transparent.
I think it's really interesting that people are doing this on chain, because with blockchain tools you can overcome a lot of the problems we have with Web 2, not just in refi, but we had ZK proofs up there before, because and this is getting into the discussion around CBDCs for later on. But it shouldn't just be about, okay, government now has more access to and insights over what the populace is doing, and arguably they already are doing that, but with blockchain, are we making that easier? But it should also be to hold government accountable as well. It should go both ways. So using and thinking about how blockchain can work in these situations, and what are some of the other kind of problems that we need to overcome in this space for something like this, carbon credits and refi on chain to work? What are some of the problems that you're seeing?
I think greenwashing is another huge problem that's going on. I think every company to some extent can be blamed of this, but a company that says, we're completely carbon friendly or carbon negative or neutral, it wouldn't take long to basically prove them wrong if they publish all of their data on the chain, because there would be a gang of climate activists who would be checking these sorts of things, and I think they should. It really does upset me and annoy me to see these big companies say that they're amazing and that they're carbon negative, but in actual fact they're not. They're just playing the game. They're doing all those things that I mentioned before. So I think moving to blockchain, making everything open and transparent, companies won't like it because it means they're going to be under more scrutiny, and they should. But it's better for everyone, because it means that finally companies will be held to account, which they're not at the moment.
And let's get into open sourcing, which is one of the key benefits of being on blockchain. But from your own kind of thoughts, like how do you see open sourcing as accelerating the transition here?
So community and collaboration is one of the key pillars of Web3. Not just from sharing code and code bases and things like that, but also just from help. These guys have built an amazing community, and they don't just talk about sharing code. They also talk about issues, the other issues that come with starting a blockchain project. So I think that's really super helpful in starting a business, no matter where you are. And I think it's really important to have that support. I mean, I've been a founder. I was a founder for a year, not a successful one, but it was a very, very lonely experience, and I did feel like I was on my own. So finding a community and being part of a community and having those people that are happy to help you, I think that's really important, and that's really key for the open sourcing.
How many other founders are there out here? Hands up. It's quite a few of you. That's really good. I know that there's some hands up for some questions and stuff there. We are a little bit behind time, but what we'll do, if we do get to be ahead, we'll come back to questions for any of the people that come up here. And we'll blame Arturo and Nick for going over time, but that's okay. Niko, can you tell people, actually just another question, let's get interactive here. How many people had heard of Hedera before this? That's wonderful. That's really cool, right? And so, look, if you want to talk more to Niko, obviously we've got the break and we might be able to come back up. But where do you kind of reside the most? If people want to see your, do you write about this kind of stuff? Are you on, connect on LinkedIn?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So my name is a very long name, which makes me distinguishable, but not very easy to remember. But Niko, Hedera, you should find me. Always love talking about climate stuff. It's a very interesting problem, and I kind of feel lucky to be part of this generation that's to deal with this problem, because it's just an interesting problem to have. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Stick around, because we will come back to those questions, but let's see how we can pace our way through. But thank you so much, Niko. Let's get to the next slide, please, Nick. Sir. Thank you. Let's get Ash van der Spuy up on stage. Thank you. Welcome, Ash. Have a seat. Okay, so while they get ready, let's go to the next slide. Because again, I'm not, just riffing off the top of my head. I do need to I do need to read every now and then, folks. Everything that I do is kind of outsourced to ChatGPT, so I'm not used to thinking anymore. Funnily enough, we do run a data science association as well, Arturo and I, and we're going to do a ChatGPT hackathon. So if anyone's interested in that as well, because it's not like I can't do 3 jobs or 4.
Do you have to use Copilot?
Yeah, well, that's the next thing. Copilot is going to be really interesting, folks, for Microsoft Office and whatnot, and we're going to get into that, aren't we? So, first of all, you've been up on stage with us before, talking about the stuff that you've been building with Harry Dell, and maybe Harry's on camera and stuff. But shout outs to Harry Dell. If you don't follow him on TikTok, probably the most entertaining lawyer on TikTok.
And he now does live streaming of gameplay.
The live streaming, game playing, lawyering, Web3 founder, degen dude, Harry Dell, shout outs. But you were building a product with him. How is the build going? Where are you guys up to now? It's crazy out there, right?
Well, we spent now almost a year. In June, it'll be a year building. We started off with a big bang. Luna depegged, FEX, etc. That was our foundational story. Our investors suggested we cut way back, and so we did. We got rid of most of the devs, and so it's essentially myself and Fidel coding and Harry lawyering, which means the build has gone a lot slower, but we're doing our security audit now, and we're about to launch with a customer doing quite a big raise, multi-million-dollar raise through our contracts.
Just for people that hadn't heard about it, the name of the project and what it is?
Sure. So we're called Juby, and essentially we're building a smart contract factory that allows you to manage your native token. So if you think fundraising, paying your team in your native token, you want to manage vesting and distribution schedules, things like that, escrow for the fundraisers, etc. Our smart contract factory generates smart contracts that you own that can manage all of that.
The smart contract factory generates smart contracts. Kind of sounds like AI generating little AI bots that do more AI better than the first AI. And I guess that's the next...
Smart contract PT, right?
Yeah, exactly. Smart contract GPT. But on that point, let's get into it. Since you have had to, scale back given the bear market situation that we're in, let's talk about some of the tools, like whether it's ChatGPT and Copilot. What's the experience been like being now smaller, but yet we've got these great AI tools out there?
Look, to be honest, I'm very fortunate that I've had some experience in coding. So being able to just switch over from sort of managing the company to actually writing the smart contracts was reasonably easy for me to do. But these tools are coming, and they're coming fast. I think Copilot is definitely up there as something that's going to disrupt. ChatGPT as well. I've seen in this week at Helix, for instance, you mentioned Helix Collective. Essentially, a software developer went to ChatGPT, wrote a problem statement, and got ChatGPT to spin out a scope for a dev that he then cut and pasted into Copilot that generated the code, and then wrote, like, I'd say about 10% of the lines of code for the pull request. So productivity is absolutely skyrocketing. And I think the risk here is a societal one. What happens to the people's jobs that rely on them being the resource that can spend 10 hours writing that code or writing that requirements document, where now you can just put it in. And I saw someone on Instagram also pointing out that GPT and Copilot requires that informational input. And most of the information on the internet is generated by people getting paid to do that. Now, the moment you go to GPT or Copilot to get that information rather than the source, it then becomes difficult for those people to get paid to generate the content. So it becomes sort of like a self-consuming negative spiral of less content being generated that can feed these engines. And yeah, essentially the risk of people losing their jobs, kind of like the Industrial Revolution, right? It's like
So
You're going to get paid to watch someone type in GPT versus like, same as you're going to get paid to watch the printing press because you're no longer copying by hand.
yeah, I mean, it's a valid kind of point there, and it's almost like the image that you get is the snake eating its own tail kind of thing. As eventually, GPT will start feeding off the its own kind of feedback, and I'm sure that there's ways for it to split that out. And some people are seeing this as more of like a tool, but I think it's right to be concerned about the flip side, what this does to society as you no longer need devs. Like before, it used to be outsourcing and going to other countries, and now it's not even outsourcing. It's like you can all be here, but you've got these like active devs there if you know how to do the right kind of prompting. So
I think a lot of the skills in the software development space will go to infrastructure. Configuring networks. I mean, there's already AIs that auto-configure networks and generates honeypots for hackers to get stuck in and things like that. But you're really going to have to go into that infrastructural skill to really have a steady job. But I think in the short term to medium term, innovation will skyrocket. You see people on the internet going like, I was always stuck going, I can't write this code, but now I'm doing this and this project, and look at this data science thing that I spat out. And so they're no longer hamstrung by that economic ability to pay for a developer.
it's interesting because it's like instead of like for me, for example, being able to start a draft of like a really bad idea or document, I can start 100 drafts. But no, I think there's still a need to have the human overlord, whether its name is Arturo or not, to overlook and just see, whether or not the output is correct. And like with coding, it's testing it. And even to your point, like people getting the code, running the code, seeing that it doesn't work and spitting the error back into GPT to then get the answer and feed it back in. And then eventually after a few iterations, get it right. But it is something to be concerned about. And I guess on the concern about workers, like you spent a little bit of time back in South Africa, your homeland and stuff. What was the experience like? Were you working over there, or did you get to go to any meetups or anything like that? What was it like?
I've got to pay the bills, so I was working. Fortunately, mostly software development, so I was able to kind of do that asynchronously. But it's a really interesting economic sort of comparison between here in South Africa and the rest of Africa. South Africa, from a Web3 perspective, they were really hit badly by the bear market. There's still a lot of companies building there, but they don't go to meetups. South Africa specifically, they're feeling it, and anybody who's still in the space are essentially heads down building because they had to cut back money, funds, and resources to build that. But if you look at the rest of Africa, there's a large, vibrant community, sort of North African, Kenya and Nigeria, etc. And I think it's got a lot to do with the environment. South Africa is very well banked, so they don't really have an issue like they have in Nigeria, where people mostly almost don't have internet, and they don't have access to banking. And so you've got innovations like M-Pesa. There's a couple of companies working on wallets that are SMS-based that you can use instead of like having to go into the internet.
Because they don't have a smartphone necessarily. It's just a normal phone.
Yeah, they've just got the old feature phones. So you send your SMS codes and things like that. But they need that to transact with each other. So that innovation exists in that space. So you have to put in your password and remember your private key, where they're already like just via SMS sending each other money via the blockchain. So it's very interesting to see how the different situations and contexts shape solutions. When SVB went down, I thought it was very interesting that one of the things that Circle mentioned in their press release was, don't worry, we've paused all transfers using our transfer tool for this one bank, but you can still do it via this other bank. American banks are archaic. And there's so many of them. So, every state is really its own little country, and sometimes every county in a state can be like an Australian state. So each county can have multiple of its own banks. So trying to transfer in between those can be very onerous. And in that case, they use the blockchain technology because transferring from one bank account to another inside of the bank takes longer than it does to do blockchain. So that drives innovation in payments in America.
I think it's interesting there, like on that point, like you just reminded me of, over there, because it's at the tails. Like whenever there's innovation, what they usually talk about is that you see the middle layer, the ones that are comfortable, the middle class across the globe, haven't really been pushed to, innovate and incentivize to. But if you're in the poorer classes, definitely not the 1% at the other end of the tail, you are forced to find ways to innovate, whether it is M-Pesa and other stuff. And then the ones at the other end of the tail, it's like they've got the money to find out and seek that next wave of opportunity. So it's usually those tails that innovate first, and the comfortable middle don't do too much. And we're sitting in the comfortable middle, but we're lucky that we've got the community here. But it just, you see the contrast when you've got innovation like that. But on the other side, you see on things like TikTok, people talking about, the millennials and people younger than me. Yes, I'm a millennial. Talking about things like, shouldn't we have a phone that just, stays in the house and it doesn't move so that everyone can just go and use that same phone? That's a landline, right? Like this is something that kids are kind of talking about nowadays, where, the struggles that we have, where we're coming from, it's just very, very different. And it's interesting that you were able to see that. And hopefully if you guys talk to Ash, you will be able to hear more of that. But yeah.
And I'd like to give kudos to the Aus DeFi community, which is made by all of you. Sure, Australia hit the bear market and things are rough in crypto land here as well, but this community is thriving. And when you sit in a room like this with 50 odd people, it doesn't feel like a bear market. So even though it's difficult to get funding from VCs, etc., this community is really pumping, and I want to thank you guys for actually keeping it going, because one of the sad things for me was in South Africa, go to a meetup and realized that the 3 people that pitched up started that meetup to meet new people in the industry.
Damn. Look, count your lucky blessings here, folks, because, whilst we are struggling, at least we've got each other and we can struggle together. So, but on that note, and the final note, have you got some advice for other builders out there or other people thinking about even working in the space?
I think the main thing is find the problem that you're trying to solve. Crypto for me is essentially in 2 domains. The one is the money system is broken, capitalism is broken, democracy is broken, and so there's great organizations that are birthed out of Australia that try and tackle things like voting or my favorite, fundamental, if anybody's met Rob, talking about post-capitalist, post-democratic society and how do we get there and how do we build the tooling for that. That's the kind of innovation that is coming out of Australia, and that's great. If you look at America, there's a lot of people worried about censorship and the state getting involved in all your transactions. So it absolutely makes sense that a non-crypto keeps going. But if you can find a problem that people want solved, they'll pay for it, and that is what makes a business viable. So if you're building something and nobody wants to pay for it, it's probably a good sign that you should move on to something else.
Absolutely. We are fast-tracking innovation here, people. And on that note, thank you so much, Ash van der Spuy. Thank you. And stick around because we'll get the speakers back up on stage for some question time. But Deb from Blisspot, welcome to the stage, Deb. Thanks for joining us. Is that on? Yeah? Okay, cool. Fantastic. How are you going at the back? Chris, we good? Thumbs up? Middle finger? Either or? Love it. I love it. I love it. 2 middle fingers. That's awesome. Let's get into the slides. Let's go to the next one. And Deb, if you want to tell... Oh, what happened there? That's it's when you hear a ghost that sounds like Nick in the background, you welcome to my nightmares.
Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the first slide. If you want to just tell people who you are and a little bit about Blisspot, please.
Thank you, Mark. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I'm Deborah Tyson, the founder and CEO of Blisspot. We're a Web3 social network that empowers and rewards people for elevating their businesses, and particularly actually businesses like NFT projects and DAOs. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics in the world today, and that is consciousness. And I think it actually follows on very well from what the other speakers were talking about. So this map of consciousness, which some of you may already be aware of, was developed by Dr. David Hawkins, an amazing man who's actually since passed away. But he developed this in relation to our emotions, saying that emotions can be attributed to a scale. So down the bottom here where we've got 0 leading up to 1,000, down at a 0 are the emotions that we find difficult, usually speaking. They make us feel heavy. We don't like them, generally speaking. And then as we go up, we can see on this scale of consciousness going up to love, joy, peace, and enlightenment, which are usually all emotions we want to feel. So talking about the human condition and how we can move humanity forward in relation to this scale of consciousness. So the next slide, please.
Thank you, Nick.
So, I think we've mixed up. We've gone a bit too far. Can we go back one? Oh no, sorry. Go forward one. Sorry.
But
Nick.
everybody
It's
blame
my fault.
Nick.
No, blame me. That's my fault. I changed the order. It's coming back to me now. So generally speaking, in this orange section that you have here, most of humanity at the moment are in this orange part of an emotional state, because stress is the world's leading cause of disability according to the World Health Organization. It's a massive problem for us. It impacts all areas of our life, and when we're in this state, usually we're living in a state of fear, we're judging people, we can often feel alone. Even we can be in a room of people but feel alone and disconnected from that true joy and peace that's actually our true nature. It's in all of us, we all have it, but we can become disconnected from it. And humanity, that is a huge problem for humanity as we know it. And so what people do is they get up to this state of 500, and it's very difficult to get into this last section here, this super consciousness section. And when we're in this next slide, please. In a state of super consciousness, we feel naturally compassionate, we're wise, we feel connected to everything. In all time and space. And so we've probably all had those moments, if you're with somebody you love, or you're in nature seeing a beautiful view, you're on a holiday, you're having those good experiences, you naturally kind of go into that beautiful expanded state. But the problem is usually it's like a roller coaster for us, and maybe some people don't even, I've also worked in as a therapist, some people hardly ever or can't even remember a time when they've ever felt like that at all. So
I think the more you work in Web3, the less you remember that kind of stuff.
Or I'm hoping the more.
Even better then, sorry.
So next slide, please. And so why is it that people can get to a level of 500, but they find it very difficult to get into those higher states of consciousness? So people who would resonate or calibrate at the level of 500 would be probably like well-known statesmen. They would be people like Einstein, Freud, people that have achieved a lot in life and they've had a great influence on the world with their work. They've left behind a real legacy. But people who get up to that 1,000 state are people like Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, who've really left a legacy or influenced a multitude of people throughout the ages. Like, that's an incredible legacy that they've left. And to do that, there has to be something very special about them. They're giving off this incredible energy, and they're talking in ways that people really resonate with and feel moved. And usually it's really actually about opening people's heart up, going from a very closed state to a very open state where we do feel connected and one with ourselves and with other people. But the reason why people even like Einstein, who was incredible, got to a state of 500 and didn't go into those higher states is because you absolutely cannot think or reason your way into those higher states. That is absolutely not the way you get there. So your intellect, and intellect is a very good thing, and reasoning is also a very good thing, because as you can see, you're a lot happier when you're up here at a state of 500 than when you're down here in a state of anger or fear at around 150. So it is good and it's on the path, but it can also stop you if you get stuck in that intellect and rationalizing things, judging things. So to get to those high states, what we need to do is live in a state of awe and wonder. So again, you've probably all experienced that when you've seen the beautiful sunset, and we can actually invite that into our daily lives and start to really make that shift in consciousness to where we feel not on this roller coaster of going between good and bad situations, right and wrong, but we're actually feeling solid and stable, and it's like you become a self-reference person. So you're not looking, you don't get your ideas or your creativity from other people. It's actually coming from within. And it's like a highly intuitive, creative state. So I think that really follows on well from what Ash was saying with how we need to be with innovation and technology, because we're all highly creative, innovative human beings. And I think some of the people who've also had a great big influence in the world to date, like Elon Musk or Richard Branson, they're not so academic so much, they're actually highly creative. And so this is about creating a shift in time where we're all going from that rational state or even fear and judgment, transitioning into our more natural, intuitive, creative, connected state. And I think education is the way that we're going to make this shift going forward. So just talk briefly, next slide please, about what keeps us stuck in this state. Because of course we'd all like to be in awe and wonder and to feel good and connected at all times. But what really keeps us stuck in our rational mind and fear, those kinds of concepts, is actually our unconscious. So our unconscious, some people see that as a negative because it is the place where we store our limiting beliefs or our past memories, and often our past memories are repressed, the ones we don't want to remember, we shove them all down into our unconscious. But in actual fact, our unconscious is the most incredible tool that we have at our disposal to make wonderful change, because it's like an energy source that we all have access to. It's very powerful and it's very strong, but if we don't master our unconscious, it masters us, and that's why we unconsciously get into situations that we wouldn't want for ourselves. We can even lash out, we can hurt other people, we can go into that fight or flight situation. So mastering our unconscious is one of the most powerful tools that we have at our disposal to make positive change going forward. So next slide, please. So what we all live in mostly is this state of consciousness here, where we are all relating to our thoughts and emotions. So our unconscious impacts our thoughts and emotions. And if we're sort of not aware of our limiting beliefs or our patterns and our behaviours, that will manifest in how we are consciously in the world, how we relate to other people, how successful we are. All those sorts of things are determined in our conscious state. But in actual fact, if we can go beyond our thoughts and emotions in that state of wonder that I was talking about, awe and wonder, Nick, it's all right for the next slide, please. We can actually tap into that super consciousness. And what we actually want to do, that's where we feel connected to all things in time and space. That's that really beautiful feeling that we have. We want to use our super conscious to determine, to give information, feedback and directions to our unconscious, because it's waiting right there for us to carry out our life exactly in the way we'd like it to be. So when we step into that power, that's one of the most powerful tools that we can have as human beings, rather than our unconscious driving our conscious, and then we end up in those situations where we don't want to be. So next slide, please.
Get the phones out, folks.
So because of my absolute passion and study in this area over the last 30 years, I developed Blisspot, which has just gone into the Web3 space. We were traditionally a Web2 product, but we've Thanks to the incredible CTO that works with me, Dr. Lee Tang, who's an absolute passion for Web3. We've gone into this space. We've just launched our Blisspot Genesis collection last week. And please check it out, and please join our Discord. It's brand new. Discord's brand new. So if you jump on, you'll be some of the first members, but we'd love to see you there and have you as part of our community.
Next slide, Nick.
And
Thank
we're
you.
absolutely delighted to be partnering with Aus DeFi NFT heroes, because there is a hero in absolutely all of us. We're all on the hero's journey. That's a Carl Jung philosophy. How we all I've certainly had my fair share of challenges, things that are holding us back from being our true selves, but then we fight, like in all those amazing movies where the hero fights their demons, whatever it is that's holding them back, and then steps into their true power. So for that reason, we're very excited, because we think it's a very good fit for us and the philosophy and the ethos of what you're doing with this, which is super duper exciting. And when you buy a NFT hero, a DeFi hero, you'll get access to Blisspot as well. We've already whitelisted it, so that could happen straight away. Yeah.
Fantastic. And if people want to check that out, remember the name Blisspot. You can find it on OpenSea, or you can look up the website. And there's we're looking forward to the partnership. If you don't know about the Heroes collection, that's a different. There's 4 different heroes. There is a link on our website or on Linkspot and stuff off the Twitter, and it's basically the different personas that we've got here. We've got the degen, the analyst, the creative person, the builder, etc. So it's carved out from all the different people. What do you get? You get a perk like you get early access to these events, knowing about it before missing out. You get a consulting session with one of the groups that's partnered with us, and you get a hoodie. And now you also get to be early access to Blisspot. So it's well worth checking out. More and more utility there. Thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Let's go to the next slides and whiz through these. So if folks don't know, we record these, and the reason why we can record it is because we've got Chris at the back, who I tease a lot of. I'm going to see this Saturday, because we're going to a wedding together. Not our own. Chris is happily married, so that's fine. But we're going to a mate's wedding, so I will see Chris again. But Chris volunteers his time dedicatedly, if that's a word, every month from Digital Village, who are one of the awesome groups that are in this space. So if folks want to contribute to what is going on here, there are many different ways. You don't have to have 3 cameras, 2 light stands and tripods and stuff like Chris. There are other ways too. CBDC pilot projects, just a quick thing on that. You can see all the names that are there. I am going to include these at the end, on the meetup page as a link, and we'll put something on the blog as well, so you can see these slides, because I know we're going to kind of quickly run through it because Chris has to pack. Let's go through. So New South Wales Government Task Force, what is that? There is going to be a focus on data, digital and AI from the New South Wales Government. We're lucky to be on there, and we're going to be pushing and championing what we can do in with blockchain and digital assets. So I want to talk about that more with us. You've got Arturo and Nick around as well. Crypto Lulu, so down in the rocks, that is a bar restaurant that has a whole lot of really great, apart from the view, there's a lot of great people that are there, and we're going to try to run some monthly events there, but it will be for NFT members only. So you need to grab a Crypto Lulu NFT. Let's go to the next. The second event, so you can see some of the imagery there. Let's go to the next one. I won't go through this. We talk about correlations between TradFi and DeFi and crypto. So they're obviously just getting really closely correlated together. It's really ironic that Berkshire Hathaway is really closely correlated with crypto when Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett hate it, yet it's really correlated. So it's really hard to hate it when, I won't get into that. Let's go to the next. Next, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that little video there. Can we go to the next one, or is it stuck? Let's go back to the questions. If people had some questions and stuff, let's get that man a mic. Someone wants to run this down. Or do you want to come up, sir? And I don't know, Numbers or Nick. Actually, Nick's up the back. Numbers, do you want to come up? This is a question potentially for you or one of the other people. that
No, it's actually a question for the Hedera guy. I remember looking into Hedera about a year and a half ago, and it seemed to me that what I learned was that either part of it was closed source or patent protected. Is that correct?
Can you give him the mic?
Yes.
So we open sourced at the end of last year, so it's all open source now. Yeah, it's all open source.
Is there nothing that is patent protected?
I believe not.
Okay. I'll check that out. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'll grab your mic too. One more question, if anyone has, or otherwise we are going to mingle and network and connect straight after this. And what happens after this? We go to the pub. We're probably going to go to Hotel CBD to continue the conversation. So feel free to stick around. Last man standing gets or woman standing, or anyone standing gets a prize. It's not going to be me. So, all right. With that note, can we go to the next slide? Oh, yeah, so the Aus DeFi NFT Heroes here. That's the collection. There'll be links to that. And there we go. We made it. Congratulations, folks. And we made it on time because I made Chris a promise that I was going to get him to his dinner later on. Everybody thank Chris and Nick up the back. And final thank you to our sponsors and the people that have joined us that have come from far and wide. Hashlock over here, put your hands up. Put your hands up, guys. Any smart contract auditing. And where's my transhuman group? The transhumanism coin group. Yep, there's a few of you guys here. Thank you. There you go. I promise you a shout out. So thank you very much. All right, that's it. Get outside and get drinking. And if you want to help me pack up, please do. Now leave the chairs.